The emergency beacon screamed across 17 star systems, its distress signal carrying the desperate plea of the Galactic Council. Ambassador Zethka of the Luminari clutched the communication device with trembling appendages, her bioluminescent skin flickering in patterns of pure terror. Around her, the council chambers lay in ruins, smoking debris scattered across what had once been the most prestigious meeting hall in known space. "Any species capable of response, please assist," she transmitted, her voice breaking through the static. "The Void Hunters have returned. We are defenseless. Repeat, the Galactic Council requests immediate military assistance." The Void Hunters had emerged from the dark spaces between stars 3 cycles ago, their black ships appearing without warning at the edges of civilized systems. No one knew where they came from or what they wanted, only that they consumed everything in their path. Entire worlds had gone silent, their populations vanishing without a trace, leaving behind only barren rock and the haunting echo of screams in subspace. The Council's combined fleets had lasted exactly 47 minutes against the first major Void Hunter assault. Ships that had taken decades to build were reduced to molecular dust in seconds. Weapons that could crack moons barely scratched the enemy's hull plating. The survivors fled with tales of impossible technology and creatures that seemed to feed on fear itself. Zethka watched through the viewport as another Council world burned in the distance. Nexus Prime, home to 12 billion souls, was now nothing but a glowing ember against the star field. The Void Hunters had taken it in less than 6 hours, their massive harvester ships draining the planet's core before moving on to the next target. No response from the Altrian Empire, reported technical operator Vex, his insectoid features twitching with nervous energy. The Crystalborn Collective has gone silent. Even the Mechanical Union has ceased all communications. The greatest civilizations in the galaxy, species that had ruled the stars for millennia, were either dead or hiding in the darkest corners of space. The Council's 1,000-year reign of peace and prosperity was crumbling in mere days. "There must be someone," Zethka whispered, her light patterns dimming with despair. "Scan the Outer Rim territories. Check the database for any military-capable species we might have overlooked." Vex's claws danced across his console, pulling up star charts and species profiles. Most showed the familiar red markers indicating either extinction or radio silence. The green indicators of active civilizations grew fewer with each passing hour as the Void Hunters spread across the galaxy like a plague. "Wait," Vex said suddenly, his compound eyes widening. "There's something here. A species designation, but it's marked with a warning label." "What kind of warning?" "Extreme hazard classification. Deathworld origin. The notation says, do not contact under any circumstances." "But, Ambassador, they're still transmitting. They're alive." Zethka moved closer to examine the display. The species was listed as Homo sapiens from a planet designated Sol 3, though their database entry was sparse and filled with ominous notes. The warning tags were extensive: persistence predators, pack hunters, tool users, highly aggressive, adaptable to extreme environments. "Deathworlders," she breathed. Every civilized species knew the theory. Planets with extreme conditions sometimes produced life forms that were so adapted to violence and hardship that they became dangerous to peaceful galactic society. Such worlds were typically quarantined and avoided. "The last contact report is over 200 cycles old," Vex continued. "A trading vessel that accidentally entered their system. The captain reported beings that looked deceptively fragile but demonstrated concerning levels of aggression and problem-solving ability. The recommendation was to maintain distance and monitor from afar." Through the viewport, another flash indicated the destruction of a fleeing refugee convoy. The Void Hunters were methodical in their extermination, leaving nothing alive in their wake. Soon, there would be nowhere left to run. "Show me their system," Zethka commanded. The star chart shifted to display a small yellow star with several planetary bodies. Sol 3 was a blue-green world, clearly inhabitable, orbiting in what the databases called the Goldilocks zone. But the warning indicators suggested it was anything but hospitable. According to the atmospheric readings, their world experiences massive temperature fluctuations, tectonic instability, frequent meteor impacts, Dangerous radiation exposure, Vex reported. The gravity is nearly twice our standard, and the atmospheric pressure could crush most species. It's a death trap disguised as a garden world. But they survived, Zethka observed. Not only survived, but thrived. Look at the energy signatures from their planet. The scans showed a world buzzing with activity. Radio transmissions filled the spectrum, indicating a technologically advanced civilization. Heat signatures suggested massive population centers, while the orbital debris patterns indicated active space travel, though apparently limited to their local system. They're pre-warp, Vex noted, probably centuries away from faster-than-light travel. Even if we contacted them, how could they possibly help? They can't even leave their own star system. Zethka stared at the tactical display, showing the Void Hunters' steady advance. Every simulation, every strategic analysis had reached the same conclusion. The Council forces were hopelessly outmatched. Conventional warfare was useless against an enemy that seemed to exist partially outside normal space-time. But perhaps that was the problem. Perhaps what was needed wasn't conventional thinking. Patch me through to their planet, she ordered. Ambassador, the contamination protocols. The protocols don't matter if we're all dead, Zethka snapped. Open a channel. The communication array hummed to life, focusing on the distant blue world. The signal would take time to reach them at light speed, and longer still for any response to return. But, as Zethka composed her message, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to unleash something far more dangerous than the Void Hunters themselves. Meanwhile, in the depths of space between the Void Hunter fleet and the fleeing Council remnants, something stirred. The enemy ships moved through the void like living things, their hulls seeming to absorb light itself. They had consumed dozens of star systems, growing stronger with each victory, feeding on the terror and despair of their victims. The Void Hunters were ancient beings, older than most stars, who viewed the galaxy as their personal feeding ground. They had swept through space before, in eons past, leaving only empty worlds and forgotten legends in their wake. This time would be no different. The galaxy would burn, its inhabitants would scream, and then there would be silence. They had encountered thousands of species over the millennia. Some fought with primitive weapons, others with energy beams that could melt asteroids. All had fallen. All had fed the endless hunger of the void. But, as their sensors detected the desperate transmissions from the Council survivors, something else caught their attention. A small signal, originating from an unremarkable star system on the galaxy's outer rim. The transmission was crude by galactic standards, barely coherent, but it carried something the Void Hunters hadn't sensed in countless eons. It carried no fear. Instead, the signal pulsed with something far more disturbing. Curiosity, excitement, and, underneath it all, something that made even beings who fed on terror pause in momentary uncertainty. The signal carried the promise of violence. On the bridge of their flagship, a creature that had no true form shifted in the approximation of concern. The Void Hunters had learned to read the emotional resonance of their prey across the electromagnetic spectrum. Fear was easy to detect, as was despair, anger, and even defiance. But this signal from the small blue world carried frequencies they didn't recognize. The response to the Council's distress call was brief and filled with terms that didn't translate properly. References to deployment, target acquisition, and something called rules of engagement. The transmission ended with coordinates and a single phrase that somehow carried across the language barrier with perfect clarity. We're on our way. The Void Hunter collective consciousness rippled with something resembling amusement. Another primitive species seeking to play at war. They would learn, as all the others had learned, that there were forces in the universe beyond their comprehension. But, deep in the quantum foam of hyperspace, where the Void Hunters made their home between dimensions, something ancient and patient began to take notice. The last time creatures from a death world had ventured into galactic space, it had taken the combined effort of 17 star-spanning empires to contain them. That was before they had learned about war on an industrial scale. The message from Sol 3 continued to propagate across subspace, carrying with it the digital equivalent of rolled-up sleeves, and the promise that humanity was about to introduce the galaxy to some very unpleasant concepts. Concepts with names like total war, acceptable casualties, and mutually assured destruction. As the first human ships began to move in the outer reaches of their system, the Void Hunters prepared for what they assumed would be another easy meal. They had no way of knowing that they had just picked a fight with a species that had spent its entire evolutionary history learning how to kill things more dangerous than itself. The Deathworlders were coming, and they were bringing gifts. Admiral Sarah Chun floated in the zero gravity of the U.S. Retribution's command center, her weathered face illuminated by the tactical displays surrounding her. At 62, she had lived through humanity's bloodiest conflicts and earned her stars in the asteroid wars. The message from the Galactic Council had reached Earth 3 days ago, and the response had been swift and decisive. "Admiral, all task forces report ready for jump," announced Captain Rodriguez from his position at the tactical station. Around them, the bridge crew worked with the controlled efficiency that came from decades of military service. Chen studied the holographic display showing the positions of the human fleet. 12 ships, each one a testament to humanity's talent for turning industrial capacity toward destructive ends. They weren't the largest vessels humanity had built, nor the most advanced. They were something far more dangerous. They were ships designed by a species that had learned warfare in the grinding horror of 2 world wars and refined it through a dozen smaller conflicts. Intelligence assessment, Commander Park, Chun ordered. Commander Park, the fleet's xenobiologist and intelligence specialist, activated his console. Based on the Council's transmissions and our analysis of the tactical data, we're dealing with an enemy that operates using principles of psychological warfare combined with exotic physics. They appear to exist partially outside our dimensional framework, which explains their immunity to conventional energy weapons. Recommendations? Standard engagement protocols will be useless. However, their reliance on fear as both a weapon and possibly a power source suggests they may be vulnerable to opponents who don't react as expected. Our psychological profiles indicate humans have several advantages in this regard. Chen nodded. Humanity had always been different from what the galaxy expected. Where other species developed civilization to escape their harsh environments, humans had developed it to master them. The result was a species that treated impossibility as a suggestion and approached problems with a combination of creativity and controlled violence that made even their allies nervous. "Fleet status report," she called out. The responses came in rapid succession. The heavy cruiser Moscow reported full ammunition loads and experimental rail gun systems operational. The destroyer Hampton Roads announced ready status for its complement of kinetic penetrators. Most importantly, the assault carrier Wellington confirmed that its marine contingent was prepared for boarding operations. "Admiral," Communications Officer Lieutenant Zhang spoke up, "we're receiving another transmission from the Council survivors. They're requesting our estimated arrival time and asking about our weapons specifications." Chen almost smiled. "Tell them we'll be there shortly. As for our weapons..." She paused, considering how to explain human military doctrine to species that had apparently never encountered it. "Tell them we specialize in aggressive problem-solving." The truth was more complex than that. Human weapons weren't necessarily more powerful than those used by galactic civilizations, but they were designed with a fundamentally different philosophy. Where other species built weapons to disable or discourage, humans built weapons to destroy completely. Where others sought elegant solutions, humans preferred overwhelming force applied with surgical precision. "All ships, prepare for jump," Chen announced. "Remember, we're not just representing Earth out there. We're introducing ourselves to the galaxy. Let's make sure they remember the meeting." The U.S. Retribution and its escorts engaged their experimental Alcubierre drives, borrowed technology from a crash probe that had wandered into the solar system decades earlier. Humanity had reverse-engineered it with typical thoroughness, improving the efficiency and adding several modifications that would have horrified the original designers. The journey through hyperspace gave the crews time to study the intelligence packages downloaded from the Council databases. The Void Hunters had swept through the galaxy like a plague, destroying everything in their path with weapons that seemed to ignore the laws of physics. They fed on terror, grew stronger with each victory, and had never encountered meaningful resistance. "Ma'am," Commander Park reported during the transit, "I've been analyzing the recorded encounters with these Void Hunters. There's something interesting in the pattern of their attacks. Explain. They always begin with psychological warfare. Terror weapons, fear toxins, displays designed to break enemy morale before the real fighting starts. But, in every case, once the enemy began showing fear, the Void Hunters became more aggressive, as if they were feeding off the emotional response. Chen studied the tactical readouts. What happens to species that don't scare easily? Unknown. According to the records, no species has ever failed to break under their initial assault. The Council fleets lasted less than an hour before routing completely. The Admiral considered this information as the fleet continued its journey. Humans had always been stubborn in the face of impossible odds. It was a trait that had served them well against natural disasters, hostile environments, and each other. Perhaps it was time to see how it worked against cosmic horrors. 3 days later, the human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler system, where Council survivors were making their final stand. The sight that greeted them would have broken the morale of most civilized species. The Void Hunter fleet hung in space like a collection of living nightmares. Their ships defied easy description, seeming to shift and flow even as they moved through the vacuum. Darkness clung to them like a physical substance, absorbing light and radio waves. Around them, the wreckage of the Council's most powerful warships drifted in expanding debris fields. Jesus, breathed Captain Rodriguez. How many ships? Sensors are having trouble getting accurate readings, reported the tactical officer. The enemy vessels seem to exist in a state of quantum superposition. Best estimate is somewhere between 50 and 500 ships, depending on which dimensional framework you're observing from. Admiral Chen studied the display with the calculating gaze of someone who had spent her career turning tactical disadvantages into strategic victories. Conventional engagement is out, she decided. Commander Park, initiate Protocol 7. Park's fingers flew over his console. Protocol 7 activated. All ships are now running silent. Electronic warfare suites are deploying quantum static generators. Around the fleet, space itself began to shimmer as the human ships activated systems designed for a very specific type of warfare. Humanity had always excelled at asymmetric conflict, and Protocol 7 was their answer to facing superior alien technology. The plan was simple in concept, horrifying in execution. Rather than attempt to match the enemy's exotic weaponry, the humans would do what they had always done when faced with a superior foe: change the rules of engagement entirely. Marine Commander Torres, report to the bridge, Chen ordered. Colonel Torres arrived within minutes, her power armor gleaming under the bridge lights. At 38, she was young for her rank, but her unit had earned their reputation in the brutal fighting during the Europa Rebellion. Her Marines weren't just soldiers. They were specialists in close-quarters combat in hostile environments. Colonel, your assessment of boarding the enemy vessels? Torres studied the tactical display with professional interest. Their ships appear to be partially incorporeal, but our quantum resonance scanners are detecting solid matter within the superposition fields. We can board them, but it'll be ugly. All boarding operations are ugly, Colonel. Can your Marines handle it? A grim smile crossed Torres's face. Admiral, my people have trained for combat in zero-gravity, toxic atmospheres, high radiation environments, and temporal distortion fields. We've fought in asteroid mining tunnels, underwater cities, and the gravity wells of gas giants. Fighting cosmic horrors on dimension-shifting ships is just Tuesday to us. Chen nodded. This was why humanity had survived every challenge their homeworld had thrown at them. They didn't just adapt to hostile conditions, they learned to thrive in them. Begin the operation, she ordered. Remember, we're not trying to defeat their entire fleet. We just need to learn how they work and prove they can be killed. The human ships moved through space like ghosts, their stealth systems masking their approach. The Void Hunters, confident in their superiority and feeding off the terror of the remaining Council forces, failed to notice the predators moving through the darkness behind them. On the bridge of the UES Wellington, Colonel Torres made final preparations for the first human boarding action against an alien vessel. Her Marines were equipped with weapons designed for fighting in environments where conventional tactics failed: gravitic hammers that could punch through exotic matter, plasma cutters that ignored dimensional barriers, and kinetic weapons that relied on simple mass and velocity rather than complex energy systems. Remember, Torres told her assault teams, we don't know what we'll find over there. Stay flexible, watch each other's backs, and, if something seems impossible, shoot it twice and move on. Questions? Sergeant Kowalski, a veteran of 3 colonial wars, raised his hand. Ma'am, what's our rules of engagement regarding non-humanoid hostiles? Torres considered the question seriously. In their rush to respond to the galactic crisis, there hadn't been time for the usual diplomatic protocols and cultural sensitivity training. Sergeant, these things have been systematically exterminating entire civilizations. If it's armed and hostile, put it down. If it surrenders, we'll deal with that when we get there. But, remember, we're not just fighting for Earth today. We're fighting for every species these things have murdered. The assault shuttles launched from the Wellington's Bay, their hulls black as space itself. Each shuttle carried 20 Marines and enough firepower to level a small city. They moved through the void toward the nearest Void Hunter vessel, a twisted nightmare of alien architecture that seemed to exist in several dimensions simultaneously. As the shuttles approached their target, sensors detected massive energy signatures building within the enemy fleet. The Void Hunters had finally noticed the human presence, and their response was immediate and terrifying. Waves of psychic terror washed over the human fleet, fear toxins that had broken the will of countless species. Nightmare visions filled communication channels, showing the gruesome fate awaiting any who dared challenge the Void Hunter's supremacy. On the bridge of the Retribution, Admiral Chun watched her crew's response to the psychological assault with professional interest. Several junior officers showed signs of distress, but the senior staff continued their duties with grim determination. Interesting, Commander Park observed. Our psychological profiles suggest we should be showing significantly more trauma response to these fear weapons. Chun nodded. Log it for analysis later. Right now, we have Marines to support. The first human boarding shuttle penetrated the dimensional barrier surrounding the target vessel, and Colonel Torres's voice crackled over the comm system with the first combat report. Contact. We are inside the enemy ship. Beginning tactical assessment. What followed was a string of profanity in multiple languages as the human Marines encountered their first Void Hunter crew members. The reports painted a picture of creatures that existed partially outside normal space-time, wielding weapons that violated several laws of physics. They also painted a picture of human Marines doing what they did best, adapting, overcoming, and winning through superior firepower and absolute refusal to accept defeat. Ma'am, Torres reported 20 minutes later, we have secured the enemy bridge. You're not going to believe what we found. The bridge of the captured Void Hunter ship was a nightmare of organic architecture and impossible geometry. Walls flowed like liquid mercury while maintaining structural integrity, and control surfaces existed in spaces that shouldn't have been able to contain them. Colonel Torres and her Marines moved through this alien environment with the methodical precision of apex predators exploring new territory. This is impossible, whispered Corporal Kim as she scanned the twisted control surfaces. These readings show the ship existing in at least 7 dimensions simultaneously. Impossible is just what we call Tuesday operations, Torres replied, examining what appeared to be the main command console. Sergeant Kowalski, secure the crew quarters. Martinez, find me their computer core. I want to know how these things work. The Void Hunter crew had not gone quietly. The humans had encountered beings that seemed to be made of living darkness, creatures that could phase in and out of reality at will, and weapons that fired ammunition composed of crystallized fear. The Marines had responded with typical human pragmatism. If standard ammunition didn't work, they used explosive rounds. If explosive rounds failed, they resorted to gravitational charges that disrupted the local space-time enough to make the enemy vulnerable to conventional weapons. Ma'am, you need to see this, called Sergeant Martinez from deeper in the ship. His voice carried a mixture of fascination and disgust that Torres recognized from encounters with particularly exotic alien technology. She followed his voice through corridors that seemed to stretch and compress as she moved, finally finding him in what could only be described as the ship's engine room. Massive organic structures pulsed with dark energy,